Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce quarter three quarterly business report, the launch event. My name's Deb Leary. I'm Vice President of the Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce and CEO of a company called Forensic Pathways. I'd like to start the session by saying thank you to our headline sponsors, BCU, for their usual fantastic support. And thank you for joining this conference digitally as well. We look forward to a time when we can all be in a room together, not virtually. We're going to have an overview of the QBR, which is the longest running report of its kind in the city region, and essentially offers a snapshot of the regional economy and tracks business sentiment. This event will be focusing on bridging the post-pandemic skills gap in Greater Birmingham as COVID-19 restrictions continue to ease. So just to cover off the format of the event so that you're aware of what's going on this morning, and it is a very packed agenda. Very shortly, we will be hearing from our sponsors, Birmingham City University. So I'll be welcoming Joe Birch, who is the Director of Innovation, Enterprise Employability and Business Engagement for BCU. Then afterwards, we will hear from our very own Raj Kandola, Head of Policy at the Chamber, who will run through the latest survey results. After Raj's run through, we'll hear from Aida Owonkwe, a Public Health Consultant, Birmingham City Council, on what the government's autumn plan means for local businesses. We'll then be joined by Claire Hatton, Head of Employment Skills Delivery, West Midlands Combined Authority, who will share insight on the WMCA's plans to create new employment pathways as we emerge from the pandemic. And finally, last but not least, we'll hear from Matt Burling, Divisional Director at SF Executive, who will give an overview of recruitment trends across the region. So all in all, it's a really packed agenda. So I'll request that you get involved on social media, following at GRBHAM Chambers and using the hashtag, that's very difficult to say, using the hashtag GBCCQBR. If you'd like to ask any questions of the speakers, put it in the chat box and my colleague Jess will pick those up as we go along. I'd now like to welcome Joe Birch, and over to you, Joe. You're on mute, Joe.
Good morning, everybody. It's so fantastic to see our businesses at this morning's QBR. Networks, I think, are a really important way of managing through challenge. I'm finding it hard at the moment to think about being in a post-pandemic. I can see the seedlings of an economic bounce, but I'm not quite sure whether we're there yet. I don't know about you, but I'm thinking about hybrid working. And I was reading at the weekend, Microsoft talking about really thinking about where you're working. And when you're home in the office, restricted by the walls, that's the time to really go for it, plow through the work, get through the MS Teams. But when you're physically present back in Birmingham, how do you make the most of that face-to-face presence? We're thinking a lot about that at Birmingham City University, and we're changing our campus ready for that hybrid view. We're also thinking about new markets. If you ask me at the moment, what are businesses talking to me about? They're talking about pivoting, trying to understand about new marketplaces. How do they transform their business to look at what the future lies ahead? And I think we can help there. I think educational institutions can help there. We've got something which is a consortia with Newman and Aston called High Level Skills Match. It asks businesses, what type of skills do you need? What types of graduates might help you make that pivot? We've got our new Steam House Innovation Campus, 110,000 square foot, where you can look at idea, prototype, all the way through to that initial development so that you could manufacture and scale up. We've got how you develop products and services to pivot. We've got a variety of masterclasses on looking at how you look at that new lens. And we have another partnership, the Institute of Technology, which is all the further education colleges, all the universities working together, looking at skills in advanced manufacturing. There are lots of ways the education sector can help you pivot to understand how you respond to that new marketplace. And that is really important, because if you look at the statistics, in terms of vacancies, there are 24% of vacancies in this region compared to 22% elsewhere. And in terms of our skills, there are 36.6% of West Midlands Combined Authority residents at MVQ level 4 compared to 43% across the country. We've got to work harder in this area. For the last 5 years, Birmingham City University has been supporting 1,800 businesses, and it's worth talking to your education partners about how they can help you. I think we can play a role in this post-pandemic era to help you start, to help you grow, to help you innovate, and as importantly, to help you skill up. I hope you really enjoy the programme this morning, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks, Jo. That was a passionate way to start a morning, and I think one of the key things from that is around partnership and working hard together to achieve those targets. So thank you. We'll hand over to Raj now, Head of Policy from the Chamber. Thanks, Raj.
Thanks, Deb. Good morning, everyone. Next slide, please, Jess. So before I go into the results themselves, as usual, some background into the quarterly business report for those of you not familiar with it. So the quarterly business report is set by the British Chambers of Commerce. It's been around since 1989. We've had the digital data set for 24 years, and our survey covers 6 geographical areas: Birmingham, Burton Chase, Lichfield, Tamworth, Solihull and Sutton. Now, our survey took place between the 23rd of August and the 13th of September. So by that point, the majority of restrictions related to COVID-19 had been lifted across the country, and we received 242 responses. And what we do is we go out to businesses and ask them a set of questions around domestic demand, export demand, recruitment intentions, but also any concerns they might be facing. And we put that data together and form a balance score. So put simply, we take the percentage of firms that have reported an increase in an area, times that by 1. We take the percentage of firms that have reported constancy in an output and times that by 0.5. And likewise, we take the percentage of firms that have reported a drop in an output and times that by 0. And that gives us an overall balance score figure. If that figure is over 50, that's indicative of growth. If it's under 50, then we're in negative territory. Next slide, please. Okay, let's start with the results then. So domestic sales refers to UK business that's taken place over the previous 3 months. And looking at the graph on the left-hand side, the QBR index combined a 2-point upturn there to a figure of 70, which is actually the highest we've seen since Q4 2018, which is great to see. Similar story in the individual sectors. The manufacturing balance score went up by 5 points compared to Q2 to a figure of 72. Likewise, the service sector balance score went up by 2 points compared to Q2 to a figure of 70. And in both individual sectors, it's because we saw a greater number of firms reporting higher domestic sales. Next slide, please. Moving on to export sales. So export sales refers to international business that's taken place over the previous 3 months. And again, looking at the graph on the left-hand side, you can see the index score went up there by 5 points to a figure of 59, back to the levels we saw in 2019, which again is good to see. In the individual sector, similar story. The manufacturing balance score went up by 1 point compared to Q2 to a figure of 61. That's because we saw a drop in the number of manufacturers reporting a decrease in export sales this quarter. And then looking at the service sector balance, that actually went up by 6 points compared to Q2 to a figure of 59. And that's because we saw a greater number of service firms reporting an increase in their export sales this quarter. Next slide, please. Now, moving on to workforce and recruitment trends. So the workforce balance score came out at 61 this quarter, which is an increase of 4 points, which is great to see. And that's mainly due to the fact that we saw a greater number of businesses adding to their headcount over the last 3 months. 57% of businesses try to hire staff, which is an increase of 4% compared to Q2. But of those, 62% face recruitment difficulties, which is an increase of 9% compared to last quarter. Interesting to see as well that of those businesses that face recruitment difficulties, 31% said they struggle to hire candidates with the right technical background. Next slide, please. Moving on to cash flow and price pressures. So the red bars you can see on the graph on the left-hand side, that's the index for cash flow. And as you can see, looking at the end of the graph for Q3 2021, The cash flow balance score stayed at 52 for the second consecutive quarter. But if you look at those red bars, looking at the start of the graph, that figure's been hovering around the 50 mark for quite some time, even before the onset of the pandemic, which again just shows you the longer term issues that firms are faced when it comes to cash flow. Now, the line above it, that's the index for price pressures. And that's the one indicator you want to be as low as possible, because the higher that number, the greater the number of firms are under pressure to raise their prices. Well, that index score actually went up by 5 points to a figure of 71, which is the highest we've had on record since we started collecting the digital data in 1997, which again, I think just takes into account the pressures firms are facing when it comes to labour and supply shortages. In terms of reasons as to why firms said they're under pressure to raise their prices, 36% cited other overheads as the main factor behind those prospective price increases. So that could be anything from taxes, legal fees, recruitment fees, and 17% cited finance costs as well, which is a 3% increase compared to Q2. Next slide, please. But despite all of that, when we look at investment intentions, the red line you can see on the graph, that's the QBR index combined for training. And that balance score actually went up by a couple of points to 59. The grey line underneath it, that's the index for capital expenditure. And that balance score actually went up by 3 points to 56. So that's the second consecutive quarter that we've seen a rise in both balance scores, and generally mirror the levels that we saw of investment before the pandemic. But of course, it remains to be seen the extent to which this recovery is sustained, particularly if price pressures continue to persist. And we are, of course, worried by the fact that a number of government support mechanisms are due to come to an end at this month, and the knock-on impact that could have on cost pressures as well. Next slide, please. Now, we also ask a question around business concerns. So we asked the question, which of the following factors are more of a concern than 3 months ago? And you can see the factors listed there on the left-hand side. 24% cited competition, which could refer to both domestic and international, and 24% cited taxation, which is the second consecutive quarter. This figure has gone up, but perhaps no surprise, given the fact the government announced proposals around uplifts in national insurance to pay for adult social care next year. 22% cited inflation, which again is no surprise given the levels that we're seeing across the country right now. And that's the largest percentage on file since Q3 2020, when the Eat Out to Help Out scheme had a distortive impact on prices. We also ask a free text question, which is, what's your primary business concern? And again, 9% cited competition. Next slide, please. And then moving on to business confidence. So the blue bars you can see on the graph, that's the index for turnover. And as you can see, that went up by 7 points, a figure of 81, which is the highest on record since the end of 2018. The red bars that you can see, that's the index for profitability. And that figure also went up by a single point to a figure of 75. Again, the largest on record since the end of 2018. So despite the cost pressures, the pressure firms are under to raise their prices, cash flow issues, it's actually great to see that the majority of businesses in the region expect their profits and turnover to go up over the next 12 months. Next slide, please. Now, given the theme of today's event, we thought it'd be quite interesting to do some analysis around the official employment rate for the West Midlands, tracking back to 2008, the current day, and comparing that with our own QBR data around the total percentage of firms that have attempted to hire and faced recruitment difficulties in doing so. So looking at that blue line, you can see at the start of the graph in 2008, going into 2008, the employment rate in the West Midlands was 71.5%. And if you track that blue line, you can see it actually took 7 years for the employment rate to hit that level again, which again just shows you the ingrained issues the global financial crisis created on the labour market locally here. Looking at that red line around that time, you can see obviously that the recruitment difficulties, or the total percentage of firms that faced difficulties when attempting to hire, really peaked around the same time as well. So when we saw a lot of economic growth, we saw the employment rate going up, but we also saw a greater number of firms facing difficulties in trying to hire staff. And that really peaked in the middle of 2015, which again, perhaps points to the perils of a tight labour market where you have a number of vacancies, but not enough candidates to fill the jobs. And then looking at the blue line again, the employment rate, you can see that it peaked at Q4 2019 at just over 75%. And then obviously, as you can see, it fell off again during the pandemic, which is no surprise. But what's interesting to see, I think a similar phenomenon occurred during the global financial crisis, where no surprise really that the employment rate dropped during the financial crisis. It also dropped during this pandemic. But what also dropped as well was the number of firms facing recruitment difficulties. And that could have been as a byproduct of the fact that during both crises, a number of firms made redundancies, which meant that those firms that were trying to hire staff, they had a bigger talent pool to choose from. But what's quite concerning to see right now, looking at that red line at the end of the graph, is how the number of firms facing difficulties in hiring has shot up again to a level higher than we saw just before the start of the pandemic, which again, I think just underlines the issues when it comes to labor shortages and the knock-on impact on economic output. Because if businesses can't fill their vacancies, orders can't be delivered, it costs time, it costs money. And that's why we're calling on the government now to really show some flexibility on these labor market shortages, whether it's looking at immigration laws or whether it's looking at training or retraining programs for those workers re-entering the market once the furlough scheme ends. Next slide, please. So to summarize then, so we've seen a welcome increase in domestic sales, an uplift in recruitment levels and export demand. There's also been an increase in CapEx and training investment, which is good to see, but major issues related to price pressures and cash flow still exist. And to end on a positive note, profitability and turnover projections remain very healthy. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned that a number of the government support mechanisms which are put in place to help businesses during COVID-19 are due to come to an end this month. So that could be the job retention scheme, for example, or the fifth payment of the Seas grant. But there are still grants out there to help businesses that are in financial distress. So just last week, Birmingham City Council announced details of 2 new schemes, which you can see up there, to help those businesses that were unable to access the Restart grant. And again, we've got the details on our COVID-19 hub. So do visit the website. You'll see which mechanisms and support schemes are still open, how you can apply from them, and when they're open, when they're available too. So again, if you have any further questions, do feel free to get in touch with myself or one of my team. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj. That's certainly a game of 2 halves, I think, if we use that analogy. There are a few, sorry about that, there are a few key points around price pressures and labour shortages and skills shortages, but also really good to see a general upturn in positivity, particularly around export as well, which I was really pleased to see. And obviously everyone, please do use the chamber, come and talk to us about any funding support that you might be needing that might still be out there, and take that opportunity to discuss any concerns that you may have, and also share with us your success stories as well. I'm now going to introduce Dr. Aiyede Owonkwe. Aiyede is Public Health Consultant at Birmingham City Council, and he's going to be discussing what the government's winter plan will mean for businesses. He's going to give an update, and we can put questions to the audience from you directly. Please put them in the chat. Dr. Aiyede Owonkwe is a consultant in public health, and he leads on the strategy portfolio, the test and trace response for the Birmingham City Council. He possesses a portfolio of outstanding competencies in public health, leadership and governance. He has consulted for various international and national agencies, NGOs, private sector organisations, EU delegations, UN agencies and other bilateral development partners. He is a busy man, so we are very pleased that he's come to join us this morning. So over to you, Aiyede.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and to present to you the update on the COVID-19 post-lockdown landscape. As some of you may have followed through, gradually the cases has begun to decrease, and the autumn-winter plan was issued recently in September. And I will try to focus on what it means for business and the plans next moving forward. I will also present some information on the local pandemic within the Birmingham area, just for information only. Essentially, the autumn-winter plan outlines the government's strategy to managing COVID and enabling people to live with COVID over as we move through the autumn and winter session. There are 5 key pillars underpinning the plan or the approach. The main one is emphasizing the part that we are now focusing on building our defenses through pharmaceutical interventions, meaning that vaccines, antivirals, and other disease-modifying therapeutics are the primary core of the strategy to living with COVID and to managing the interface. Also, there will be a focus on identifying and isolating positive cases to limit transition. That means both the test, trace, and isolate, and what it will mean for industries and how we move forward on that. Also, the key aspect of the plan includes supporting the NHS and managing the pressures over this winter period to prevent the NHS from being overwhelmed if infections were to increase, and to enable people, the NHS, to be able to manage the pressures as it goes along. There's also the focus on enabling people to live and adopt safe behaviors, both industries and businesses, to be able to cope with the evolving information as we move along. There is an international approach, which is about supporting other countries in terms of vaccines and others to be able to, the COVID-19 is a pandemic, and therefore what happens elsewhere also impacts on the UK and the Greater Birmingham area. Also, the plan talks about there is what we call a potential plan B in case the NHS becomes overwhelmed or the infection begins to grow. So again, that outlines measures that the government could take in order to be able to address any changes that arise from an evolving or increasing number of cases. The core aspect of the advice to the businesses, which is the primary focus of this presentation, are essentially to understand that the businesses are still responsible for enabling their staff to work safely in their places of business. So by law, businesses right now are not allowed to ask employees to come to work, but when they are required to isolate. Also, businesses are encouraged to ask employees to stay at home if they are feeling unwell, and that's really to enable and limit the spread of COVID at that phase when they are unsure in a way if they have COVID or not. Also, there is the general guidance about enabling and reviewing your risk assessment, identifying adequate the ventilation of the business premises and where people work.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second, and sorry to interrupt your presentation, but I'm just double checking because we're only seeing the title slide. Have you moved any slides on at all?
Yeah, I have moved quite a bit.
Yeah, we're not getting those.
Okay. Yeah. I will just rewind quickly to emphasize the fact that the autumn and winter plan, which was recently issued in September, early this month, focuses on, there are 5 key pillars setting out the approach that government intends to take to manage the pressure. The key 5 pillars are: 1, to be able to focus on our defenses using pharmaceutical interventions, which means vaccines, some new antiviral that may come on board, and other disease-modifying therapeutics. Also, there really focus on identifying and isolating positive cases to limit transition, which essentially means continuing the testing and tracing and isolating our patients as they come aboard. And also, the key other aspect of the plan is to support the NHS and social care, managing the pressures, both the winter pressures and the processes over as we recover from the pandemic. There is a part about advising individuals, people, and businesses on how to protect themselves and others, including continuing to give clear guidance and communications. And then, obviously, given the international nature of businesses, it will also be important to focus on managing the international dimensions of the pandemic, such as supporting other, perhaps developing countries with vaccinations in order to both limit the emergence of new variants in order to protect the UK, but also to support those communities to be able to weather the storm of the distance. There is a key aspect of the plan which emphasizes on steps that might be taken if the NHS becomes overwhelmed. Next slide, please. And following up from that plan, as I was saying, there are major advices emanating for businesses, which we need to focus on. One is about how businesses need to continue to do a COVID-19 risk assessment. And by law, as you are aware, they are not allowed to ask employees to come to work if they are required to self-isolate. Other, not required by law, but are encouraged, is that employees or businesses should ask employees to stay at home if they are feeling unwell, and then to follow the guidance around testing and the processes to determine if they are having COVID or not. Also, there will be, as part of the risk assessment, the business premises are to be inspected and checked both for in terms of ventilation and to be able to enable air to come in, because the evidence suggests that well-ventilated areas help to minimize the spread of COVID. Also, as part of the behaviors, businesses are expected to provide hand sanitizers to enable staff to continue to clean their hands more frequently, manage clean surfaces, and continue to prevent. There is the requirement to be able to display the NHS QR code poster for customers to check in if they are using the NHS COVID-19 Pass app. And also businesses might consider using the NHS COVID Pass, which is about supporting those who have already been vaccinated to be able to identify that they have been vaccinated. Next slide, please. I've included this slide because businesses also have staff and employees, and just to let you know about the policy or the guidance on vaccination for 12 to 15 years, which has been recommended, and the rollout has gradually begun to be implemented in our patch. Next slide, please. Next slide. The next set of slides are more for information, which I will add, we will share with the participants. Is essential to let you know where we are with COVID within the Birmingham area. In the 7 days leading up to 19 September, we had equivalent of about 237.5 cases per 100,000 that were reported in the Birmingham area. As I indicated, this showed a gradual trend downwards of about 13.2 compared to 3124 cases in the previous 7 days. Next slide, please. Again, this is one for the West Midlands area in terms of broader than Birmingham. You also notice that there has been a week of decreases in all ages case rates for the 25 to 30 lower tier local authorities in the West Midlands area. And the regional rate of change in all age cases rates is 15% lower, or higher than the national average. Again, there is a continual decrease of case rates for the 60 plus in the West Midlands areas. Again, that depends, shows the change downwards, which is also higher than the national average. So this demonstrates that the cases are dropping within our area, but we still need to remain vigilant. I think I will stop here and I will take questions from participants to address specific areas. The other slides are more for information. Thank you.
Thanks, Maidi. That was there's a lot of information within those slides, so it's going to be a good opportunity for people to review the slides and get their heads around the figures. I suppose I'm interested in, from your perspective, really. I see that there's the cases have dropped. So from your perspective, because you're sort of the cutting edge of it, does that inspire you with confidence as we move into winter, or do you still think we're on? It's a very fine line where we could tip over again.
Well, as you notice from the slide, the rate of cases are being monitored on a daily basis and regularly. And the one thing we've learned from the COVID is the evolving nature of the pandemic. But the trend suggests that especially with the vaccination, increase in rate of vaccination among our population, we are moving gradually down and feeling a bit safer. However, it is closely being monitored.
Yeah, I think that's one of the encouraging things I see from that process, is that we're all talking about returning to work, and what that means, whether that's fully returning or a hybrid model. But if it's either of those things, it's all about us being able to build confidence in our people to say that it's safe to come back, and that the processes are in place. So it really is about communicating and instilling those processes as a part of the fabric of who we are now, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. And the engagement and communications continues, and we're reaching out to businesses, and we're putting the guidance available, and the public health department remains ready to respond to requests for advice and to point people in the right directions.
Yeah, I think one of the other things I noticed, it says on part of the plan about government pursuing an international approach, and I'm hoping that is, you know, we can see that as a real positive, because this is, as it by its very nature, a global pandemic, and we can't work in isolation on this. So I'm glad to see that those sorts of dialogues are still relevant.
And also, especially with Birmingham area in terms of the high student population and the universities and the need to manage both the borders and the coming in and going out. So that's really a key aspect of the strategy.
Well, thanks ever such a lot, Aida. I know you're a very busy person, so thank you for sharing your slides, and I'm sure people will be fascinated to read them once they're sent through to them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Aida. I'd now like to introduce Claire Hatton. Claire Hatton is Head of Employment and Skills Delivery at the West Midlands Combined Authority, and she'll be presenting on the steps the WMCA are taking to open up employment opportunities as the region emerges from the pandemic. Claire leads on the delivery of the WMCA skills portfolio, including the recently devolved 130 million adult education budget and a range of pilot initiatives, including digital retraining and employment support pilots. Previously, Claire worked for the Learning and Skills Council in senior policy roles and for PwC in their public sector practice, supporting a range of national and government clients. And before joining WMCA, Claire spent 4 years working in further education in the senior leadership team at City College, Coventry, giving her direct insight into the delivery of skills in the region. So I'm delighted to welcome you, Claire, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Deb. Wow, that was a nice introduction, wasn't it? Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the skills picture we're seeing in relation to recovery, what we're doing to support skills development generally, and particularly in the context of some of the recruitment challenges that we're hearing and some of the things that Raj outlined in terms of the quarterly business survey as well. I want to just unpack a little bit about what we see as a skills deficit and what is probably less so, and also how we've got to make sure that this is an inclusive recovery, not just a twin track one. So as we're starting to see the signs of economic recovery, what we're seeing from a skills perspective, we're obviously seeing job vacancies increasing rapidly to above pre-pandemic levels, but we're seeing some real hotspots in vacancies in nursing, care, logistics, hospitality, sales. We still have far more people claiming benefits than pre-COVID. You know, our numbers have not come down, and that is particularly so in Birmingham. Across the region, we've seen numbers of claimants drop more sharply in Coventry and Warwickshire and in the Black Country than we have done in Birmingham. Not entirely sure why that is, but there's something structural as well at play in the Birmingham area that's not quite as evident in other parts of our region as well. We've talked about recruitment issues being reported. Some where skills are the factor, particularly technical skills, some less so, some possibly more about terms and conditions, accessibility, etc. And we are picking up concerns around the end of furlough. And again, for us in the region, Birmingham particularly, where there's still over 30,000 people receiving support, far higher than any other parts of our region. And even if only a fraction of those don't go back to work, we could see the number of claimants rocket again in Birmingham as a result of that. From a more skills point of view, we are seeing slow but increasing take up of Kickstart by businesses and by young people as well, starting to see that build, and as we get towards the end of the scheme, unfortunately starting to see that build. We are starting to see, after a slow start, restart the government's employment advice scheme for those who are unemployed, and the pre-employment training there starting to take off, but as yet not seeing the volumes coming through that. And our colleges and training providers are telling us that there's still a lack of take-up in some of the specific sectoral and technical training they're doing. Some is oversubscribed and flying off the shelf, where they're running training programs linked to civil service recruitment vacancies, where they're doing some of the construction vacancies, but where they're running sector-based work programs for care sector, for example, less so and less take up. So we're seeing a mixed picture, even where we've got training provision of take up. So lots of things to kind of grapple with there. If I just return to our unemployed population, because there is a sort of a little bit of a narrative, we've got all these vacancies and we've got all these unemployed people, why are they not just matching, and it must be because of skills. I'm not sure it always is. Many of our claimants are unable to work. The total UC universal credit population, probably only around half are looking for work. A lot of the others will be on health related benefits, etc. And actually a lot of the universal credit claimants are working, but are not earning enough to move out of UC support at the moment. So again, we're seeing a real different picture in Birmingham to we are in Black Country, in Coventry and Warwickshire. We are seeing that claimant figure staying stubbornly high and not seeing the drops coming down. And we are seeing the same inequalities that we saw pre-COVID. Young people, those from non-white communities, women, particular areas of the city, areas in East Birmingham where we saw issues before, and we're seeing some of those inequalities exacerbated by COVID and continuing to be locked in through recovery. So that's something that we are really keen to tackle alongside supporting businesses to get the workers they need as well. So probably some really good bits, some really not so good bits, and I don't think there's a magic bullet. In terms of skills, I don't think it is just as simple as putting on lots of skills training. It's absolutely a part of it, but I think there is more to do collectively, recognising that businesses are under pressure to recruit for all the reasons Raj talked about fulfilling orders, producing, responding to growth, but I don't think it's always skills. So undoubtedly Brexit has had an impact in some of our industries, hospitality, nursing, logistics, etc. And some of those jobs can't just be trained for overnight. Nursing, for example, takes a while to get your nursing qualifications. And I think part of it for us is about trying to look differently at training those people who are already in the workforce as well, to be able to change careers, pivot careers, progressing careers. I think we kind of do know, don't we, that those people that are already in the workforce now are going to be the vast majority of the workforce in 1 year, in 2 years, in 5 years time. Yet we seem to focus on training, the need to train unemployed people to fill these vacancies. We do need to do that, but equally we need to look at who we're training, who's already in the workforce, to be able to pick up some more of those technical skills, because undoubtedly it's far easier to train people with a number of years experience of working in the care sector to be a nurse into a clinical pathway, from a skills and knowledge perspective. Where it's more difficult to train those people is access and time. Lots of those people are working full time, have family commitments, other life commitments, etc. So we are working hard with our training providers to make sure we've got different and accessible offers. So as well as employment training for people who are not in work, we are really looking at those critical areas of skill shortages and the people in work, and what we can do to progress people into those roles. We recently launched our health and care training plan with 30 colleges, training providers and universities across the region, with industry, setting out the pathways and the qualifications and training available in each of those routes. So a lot more to do, and I say it is quite complex really in terms of skills training. But just a little bit more, I think, about what we're actually doing right now. Deb mentioned our £140 million adult education budget that we manage annually. A really big chunk of that is on English, maths, ESOL, basic digital, to make sure that our residents have the basic skills they need to be able to enter work or further study. And we do that every year. That is ongoing. That provision is there. It is available. So we are continually working to reduce the number of people with no qualifications so that there is more opportunities for our residents and more choice for them in terms of other training or work they might take on. And at the beginning, we heard from Jo about higher level skills, and she's absolutely right. You know, we will see over the next decade the majority of the jobs created requiring skills at level 3 and level 4, not at those lower levels. So over the last 2 years, we have been systematically increasing our level 3 provision offered in part-time and full-time routes, so people can do that. But that's the stuff that I'm talking about is not a quick fix. It takes a bit longer to get people up to those levels, but we are doing that and we are working on that. We shouldn't forget that we are increasing the number of people in our region with level 3 and 4, albeit we still do sit behind the national kind of average and benchmark. So much more to do. And for us in our region, much more to do with some of our different community groups there, so much more to do with some of our BAME women, particularly in terms of increasing their skills level to higher skills, so that people will have the technical skills. And I think it's probably just worth reflecting there that lots of people don't train on spec just because the narrative says that jobs are going to be at level 3 and 4 over the next few years. They train because they know there's going to be an outcome for them, because they know there's going to be employment or increased salaries. So I think sometimes it's making the really clear link, evidential link between that training and what the resident will get as well for it, to make sure more people are attracted to training at higher levels. Really key to our work at the moment is working sectorally, employer and sector-led initiatives. I've talked a little bit about our healthcare plan, where we're being really cognizant of setting out those training pathways and those career progression routes and making sure the two align and that we have access for people to be able to pick up at various stages in the journey. We're investing significant amounts of our money in short, sharp pre-employment training. We call them snappily titled SWAPs, Sector Work-Based Academy Programmes. We've already invested 7 million in training people to move into the construction industry, and we fund things like CSCS cards. We use our adult education budget to fund the stuff that people need to move into employment, and that is the beauty of devolution, that CSCS cards are not funded across the country in pre-employment training. They are in the West Midlands because we've worked closely with business to understand what is the training and qualifications people need to walk onto site and be productive. Therefore, that's what we will fund. And we've put on new programs as well, where we're turning things around much more quickly than previously. Digital boot camps, for example, 16-week programs where people are coming out and walking into roles as junior software developers, data analysts, etc. Now the programme is national, but piloted here in the West Midlands. So doing lots of things like that, and then working with individual employers where we're starting to see skills gaps emerging. Teaching assistants, the COVID top-up money has resulted in a growth in teaching assistants within a lot of schools, and quite a recruitment pressure there. We can train people to be teaching assistants 12 weeks intensively. So again, it's pivoting some of our college and training providers' delivery models to make sure that they're not always doing what they've always done and doing something differently. And I talked about in-work progression. We're flexing our funding to be able to support people in work to progress, working with the West Midlands Ambulance Service, for example, where the workers in the call centre taking the 999 calls are able now to do an access to HE course alongside work, part-time, working with Dudley College, if they want to progress to be a paramedic. So again, just looking at how we can flex what we do, how we can work intelligently with businesses. We've got a great network of education providers, across the West Midlands, our universities, our colleges and our training providers, and they are keen to do more. And we are, and like I said, none of this is a magic bullet, but we need the input from business as well. The narrative that is we can't recruit because it's a skills issue doesn't help us. We do need to understand what is that skills issue, what can we do about it, how might we do it in the short term, but also in the medium term. And we're absolutely up for having more of those conversations with businesses. So I would encourage anybody to talk to us. So I guess in summary, yes, it's great. We've got some opportunities in terms of moving people back into work, reducing our unemployment count. We've got to make sure we do it inclusively. We've got to be able to respond to businesses in the short term, and we are trying our hardest to do that. But we mustn't forget planning for the medium term and for our future growth as a region. So that was a real whistle-stop tour. I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavour of what we're doing. Thank you, Deb.
Oh, thanks, Claire. It's certainly a complex landscape, and I think that one of the key messages from that is that we've got to be creative, and we've got to be flexible and adaptable to all the situations. But it is certainly a complex landscape. Please do put any questions in the Q&A. We'll be talking to Claire later. Once we've introduced and heard from Matt Burling from SF Executive. Matt Burling is the Divisional Director at Chamber Patron SF Executive. Matt is an experienced member of the Midlands recruitment team and has specialised in the recruitment of marketing roles across the Midlands market for over 10 years. Matt's recruitment career spans over 18 years, and he has worked for startup businesses and a global PLC, in which time he's led successful teams and managed in multiple offices. Matt specialises in the senior end of the sales and marketing market in the Midlands, and Matt will discuss wider recruitment trends across the region and the steps businesses are putting in place to overcome recruitment issues. This couldn't be more topical, so welcome Matt. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Deb. That's great. Just quickly, can you see my screen? Is it have I shared it okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Super. Okay, fantastic. Well, hopefully these transitions will work in here, but thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you guys today about challenges in the market, and as you say, what businesses can do to fundamentally kind of give themselves a leg up or a head start in terms of recruitment strategy. So just as a point of agenda, what I'm going to run through today is a bit about SF. So just so you know who we are, the current candidate attraction challenges in the marketplace, what businesses can do to improve chances of recruitment success, and then, as luck would have it, a live case study around SF Recruitment's own journey in terms of what we've done from our own attraction strategy over the last 18, 12 and 6 months. So yeah, let's give you a bit of background on us. Effectively, we're a specialist professional services recruiter based in Birmingham, Nottingham and Leicester. We've worked with over 40,000 candidates, 13,000 clients locally since launch in '98. We recruit into finance, technology, HR, procurement, marketing, sales and office support. And I sit in our SF Executive brand, which is a separate search brand recruiting all C-suite and divisional director level roles, including CEO and MD positions, which gives us quite a nice kind of overview of the market, if you like. And our mantra has always been about finding a natural fit. So we're really passionate about finding people and companies that are perfectly matched. Just in terms of our local credentials, we're really proud of our Midlands heritage and presence. We're all about bamboo, as you'll probably see from the backdrop here, and our branding, but we pledged to become a single-use plastic-free business in 2019. We sponsor the Birmingham Bears, the cricket team, and feature on their bamboo kit. Oh, there's a picture there, that's good. We're exclusive patrons of Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce and recruitment partners of West Midlands Growth Company. And we're nationally recognised as a great place to work. Sunday Times 18th best small company to work for in 2021, and that's our second successive year in the top 20. So there's a couple of little bits pieces there. So in terms of current market challenges, we've heard quite a lot today in terms of what's going on out there, but fundamentally I think we can acknowledge that over the last 18 months the market has changed considerably. And to be fair, look, there are always challenges, I guess, around downturn or redundancies or whatever that might be. But I think the key to this is how businesses can adapt, how they can react and be proactive in terms of their recruitment strategy. So given our audience of candidates and clients that we talk to regularly, you know, we get really very real and very active feedback from those guys. But this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination, but the things that are in play at the moment that we think, you know, nationally, that can be transposed into the local market as well, are uncertainty, quite an obvious one, I guess, but there is a reluctance to move jobs in a turbulent environment. If you look at back to 2008, when we had the kind of the recession then, the perception was that there would be thousands of candidates, on the market looking for jobs. And what actually happened was we saw in recruitment that registrations went down because people that were in jobs and were kept in jobs just hunkered down. They didn't start looking for career moves, and they didn't go out to the market looking for that next career step. Similarly, we're seeing that at the moment, or we're starting to see kind of, chinks of light, if you like, at the end of that, where people are starting to now be a bit more proactive in their search. But if you talk to a lot of candidates, they feel very loyal towards the businesses that have kept them employed during the pandemic. And there's also that kind of doubt, I guess, in their mind around, well, what if I move? What if I leave? What if there's a downturn? What if something happens and therefore I'm last in, first out? Which isn't always the way, but it does certainly play on candidates' minds when they're thinking about their next career moves. We've heard that vacancy numbers are up. But what that means is for the candidates that are actively looking for a new role, there's a larger pool of career opportunities to choose from. So you can see why demand is starting to outstrip supply. And businesses have cottoned on to this. Businesses have worked out how difficult it is to hire at the moment. So you're actually seeing them go, hang on, it's easier to keep somebody than it is to hire somebody. So salaries are starting to be tweaked, benefit packages, flexibility, counter offers have all increased. So even those candidates that go all the way through the process of looking for a new job are susceptible to their employer going, oh, no, don't resign, don't leave, hang on, we can do all this for you. And it's almost that better the devil in a turbulent market where people are looking to stay put potentially. Flexibility and remote working is a challenge, but also, a good thing in the marketplace. But candidates can start to look for opportunities further afield now, which takes them out of the region, which limits the skill pool locally. So actually that job that's 1 or 2 days a week in London, suddenly becomes much more attractive. And, they're becoming more and more commonplace now that, it certainly makes our job harder, because we used to have clients recruiting, they've got to be within half an hour to 45 minutes from the office. Now we're getting briefs where it's, actually, we don't really care where the person's based. They can come from anywhere. So we have to kind of broaden our own searches as well in that respect. The market for talent is moving at amazing pace at the moment. We're seeing more and more clients with shortlists of candidates hesitating in terms of moving forward to next stages, making offers, and candidates have got multiple choices out there. So, if you don't move quickly, you're likely to lose people in the process. Culture fit is becoming more and more important to candidates. It's a big topic at the moment. Businesses' purpose, why they do what they do. Candidates want a story. They want to feel part of something. And it's becoming more and more commonplace now that candidates are talking about the value that, that they feel that they get from their employer, or how they're valued by their employer in terms of their input. So that cultural fit's a really difficult one, because how do you actually convey that when you've never met a candidate before? It's a very difficult kind of thing that clients are having to kind of face, I guess. I would suggest that, some businesses aren't doing enough to stand out as an attractive career destination. And I'll come on to that in a moment in terms of some of the things that we can do. But the market isn't supporting, just popping an ad out there and seeing what happens and seeing who you get. Again, it's that proactivity piece around, what else can we do to make ourselves stand out? There's a lot written at the moment about the Great Resignation. I don't know whether people have kind of, are onto this. We see quite a lot of it, and we're discussing it quite a lot in our world. But during the pandemic, there's been a genuine reassessment by employees as to what's really, really important to them. And we're talking to people who they're ready to leave. They're ready to leave their business. They're ready to leave employment. They're ready to kind of call time on, a 30, 40 year career, because actually, they don't see themselves doing the job for the next 5-10 years. There are people that are thinking about, actually, I've always wanted to do something slightly different. The time I've had during the pandemic, or the change in work circumstances during the pandemic, has led me to actually look at it and say, I'm going to leave this job and I'm going to go and retrain. I'm going to go and do something completely different. But this isn't a local issue. This is worldwide at the moment. And there's lots that can be read up on this, whether it's real, whether it's a myth, whether, it's a really interesting topic out there at the moment, but it's having a knock-on effect into the markets. And I think kind of most of all, what I would say in terms of the challenges is that we are operating in a candidate-driven market. And the worst thing about that is that candidates have started to cotton on to that, and they know it. So actually, their requirements are getting more, I suppose more kind of specific in terms of what they want out of a next role. So those are some of the challenges that we've seen. And I think, from a perspective of advice that we can give to people and to businesses, you know, around attracting, hiring and retaining talent is, first and foremost, don't look at attracting, hiring and retaining talent in isolation. There's almost a circular reference here that, you know, that what attracts somebody to a business should also be the thing that retains them and keeps them in the organization going forward. But our advice on this perspective to businesses would be, try and understand what the market wants. It's not easy, you know, in terms of assessing what the candidate pool wants out there in the marketplace, but we are in a war for talent at the moment. And I think that's really, really pertinent, you know, that you have to be on the front foot as a hiring business, you know, to make sure that you secure the people that you want. And one of the things that I think is a really important process to go through is start to think about your employer brand. Can you proactively promote the benefits of your business, your vacancies? Do people know that you're there, you know, when they start to look for their next career move? And a really good starting point for this is to ask yourself why someone should or would leave their current business to come and work for you, why they should choose you guys over, you know, a business or a competitor down the road. What is it that's going to make your business stand out when candidates ultimately are having choice? And choice is, you know, it's great, but at the same thing, it makes your hiring process somewhat more uncertain. We suggest embracing the new flexible working culture, but striving to keep the culture of your business intact. But I think with flexible working, it's really, really important to remove ambiguity from your flexible working policy and be consistent across all levels of your business. So I think it's quite an interesting, you know, struggle almost, you know, with flexibility, whereby, yes, we offer flexibility, but not everybody lives and breathes it. And therefore you don't necessarily kind of get that feeling that it is a truly flexible environment. Think about salaries. You know, we've talked about the fact that some of these things are being tweaked at the moment. Think about wider benefits and offerings that enhance employees' welfare. And then on the hiring piece, when going to market, have a really, really clear picture of what you need. Whether you're using agency, whether you're advertising directly, be really, really clear on what you need and what you can flex on, and have a very clearly defined recruitment process and get commitments from all stakeholders on timescales, because you need to be ready to be available, to act quickly and to feedback promptly, given the pace of the market at the moment. If you interview somebody first interview and you like them, there's a decent chance that somebody else has interviewed and liked them as well. So it's important to try and move that process forward as quickly and as feasibly as possible. And then I think on the retention piece, one of the key things, and I touched on it earlier, about keeping people as opposed to, keeping people as opposed to sort of having to find new ones. You know, if you've got good employees, invest in them, work to keep them, you know, keep them on the hook, continue to evolve and to continue to develop. So it's there's a few things that we can definitely do there. And again, it's not exhaustive, it's not a comprehensive kind of, you know, advice guide by any stretch of the imagination, but really rather timely. I can talk to you with some confidence around this employer brand piece, because we've been through a huge journey in the last, 12 months, then 6 months, in an industry which has traditionally not been the most flexible, and although even pre-pandemic it was starting to get better and understand kind of, working from home and that bit of flexibility that was sometimes required. But what's amazing is our leaders here in the business have ultimately all got circa 20 years experience. So actually have gone kind of through that old school recruitment kind of model. And we've had to be quite brave, and we've had to take quite a leap here in terms of some of the things that we've put together in developing a SF experience, if you like. So what we're doing is we've almost rebranded ourselves as an employer, because we're keen to hire experienced hires into our business. So we're trying to create the best possible working environment. So what we've done is fully flexible working hours and a hybrid office model. So employees can choose when, where, and how they work. We've looked at the pay out there in the marketplace, and we've put together a package, that is market leading. We've talked about employee ownership. So we're actually given all employees and future employees, a stake in the business. 30 days annual leave. So we've changed that to make it market leading. A wellbeing suite offering mindfulness support, counselling, online GP services, discounted gym memberships, generous parental leave packages. So we've really listened to what our employers want, and also put some stuff in there that I think, they probably didn't know they needed or wanted as well. And then company discount via Perkbox and much, much more. And we've branded it. And this is our, this is our kind of attraction package. So this is how we go to market, looking for people to come and join our business. And ultimately, this is also what is going to retain people in our business as well. But that's roughly it, but a case study of what we've done ourselves. And that kind of leaves me at the end of what I had to talk about, I guess.
Thanks, Matt. That was absolutely fantastic. I mean, you touched just about on everything. And I'll come back to that point about the Great Resignation, because whether it's a myth or whether it's not, it's certainly causing a lot of debate. So we're going to go into a Q&A now. So I'd like to welcome Matt, stay online if you can, and Raj and Claire, and potentially Jo if she's still around. Fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, so we've had a couple of questions coming in, and the first one is for you, Claire, really, and this is from David Clark. His question is: to what extent are long-term issues such as low attainment skills amongst young people in some of our wards exacerbating the critical applicant shortages in some sectors, and are more resources and support needed for our schools, primary and secondary, to ensure that longer term we do not encounter the same problems? He also goes on to say that the emphasis always seems to be on supporting those of working age, whereas we need surely to ensure that the next generation are employment ready.
Yes, I suppose it is the short answer. Yes, there is more. I mean, I talk specifically about working age because that's the remit we have at WMCA. We don't have a schools brief, but absolutely. And I think you can see it writ large in lots of the data in terms of not just poor educational experience, but lots of adverse childhood experiences in terms of life chances of young people. And we do see that in lots of the groups that I talked about ending up being disadvantaged. So, and I think that's my point about it's not a magic bullet. We do need to do more in schools. We need to do more for those that are already in the workforce. We need to do more and better for all of our residents, and absolutely schools play a part in that too.
And I think that connectivity between schools, education and business is critical on that. They don't see the role models, they don't see the processes, they don't see what is the potential, then we're never going to get those kids coming through. So I think that's really important. Just handing over to Matt. Are you seeing the similar challenges across the board, both in permanent and temporary candidates, or are they completely different?
There are similarities. I mean, I think we expected, probably incorrectly, last year for there to be a huge spike in interim. While everything settled down. Now, I think we saw at the start of the year a bit of an increase in the interim requirements out there in the marketplace as people kind of came to terms with where they were, but it was never kind of the huge spike that we thought it would be to backfill some of the gaps that had been made. But I think in terms of interim, we're seeing, through IR35, some people moving away from it, but at the same time, there's still a captive audience out there for interim, and the ability, I think, in the interim market for candidates to be more flexible. You're starting to see more portfolio interims at the moment who've got like 2 or 3 different things on the go on part-time nature. So it is quite an interesting, it's an interesting time out there. But yeah, the challenges are the same. Good people will always be in probably shorter supply than the demand, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comment you made about the Great Resignation, which I think has been bandied around by a couple of organisations. I think Microsoft was one of them, and I think the stat was something like about 40% of the population who are going to actually step back and resign. They've gone through COVID, they've reassessed their lives, they don't want to work for the employer that doesn't understand how they want to work anymore, and they may want to set up on their own. So there's a great deal of flux, isn't there, in the market at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I think that reassessment, is what's been apparent, and everyone, I'm guessing, probably reflected over the last 18 months in terms of what am I doing, how am I doing it, why am I doing it in this empty room sat on my own, or kind of, and do I want to be back with people? And I think it's how businesses are reacting to kind of listening to those people, and hopefully getting the chance to have those discussions, because sometimes those discussions around, quitting, shall we say, or leaving your job, they're very private matters, so people don't always give their business the opportunity to have those conversations. But it is an interesting one, and I've spoken to businesses where, boards of directors, 2 or 3 are starting to, they could be moving on in the next sort of 3 to 6 months, and it's an interesting challenge out there.
Yeah, it certainly is. And if I just come to you, Jo, what feedback are you getting from your recent graduates as they enter the job market?
So graduates are feeling very sort of concerned. Like students, there's lots of things that have been, school students, there's lots of things that have been missed. So for example, a 14-year-old won't have had their 1 week's work experience. And so if you think many people who've gone through A-levels haven't gone through some of those young adult experiences that prepare you to move forward, and many university students haven't had, for example, some of the work experience opportunities to give them the confidence in that workplace. And I think as a community, we've got a huge opportunity there to step forward. It was really interesting to David's question about the school children. The key thing about all of these things is aspiration and accessibility. Aspiration, making people feel excited about the job opportunities ahead, making them see sort of positivity about how things are enabling them, giving them opportunity. And I think mentors have a massive role to play. I noticed Susie Branch-Haddo's on this meeting today, brilliant ambassador for mentorship. Mentorship is such an important role, and everybody on the call today, you can go to any educational institution, any school, you can make a difference about giving people hope by mentoring, by showing them the future opportunities, by allowing them to see how they make that next step. The other thing that's really important, and this is graduates, it's everybody, and it reinforces Matt's point. We've got to think about quality work. So a lot of individuals who've been working from home start to understand that it can be a very transactional place, but rich places. When you look at the articles online, and we know this from partners that we work with, you want to work with somebody where there's quality work, there's quality engagement, where you're in a meeting and people are present, where you can visibly sense energy in the room and progress. And areas where people are getting really hacked off is where they're going through the same old. So if you want to be a good employer, I think you need to think about quality work. And if you want to be a great ambassador for the region, you need to really sign up to aspiration and step forward and offer yourself as mentors. Show our young people they've got a huge amount of opportunity ahead of them, and help them along the way.
Absolutely, you couldn't have put it better myself, my dear. It absolutely spot on. And we've had a question from Antoinette Hassan, and this one I'm going to hand over to you, Claire. Graduates who did not benefit from careers fairs during the COVID restrictions, where should they go for advice?
I mean, firstly, I know that their universities will support them post-graduation as well, and Joe's giving me the thumbs up, so obviously back to their university. But if people have relocated and are in a different area and do want to work locally, taking on board some of the things Matt said, I think there are a range of places. You know, there is the National Career Service, you know, helpline, 24-hour access website, but equally, you know, companies like Matt's. You know, I talk with a recruitment advisor as well about potential careers, about opportunities, about future. I think there is lots of advice out there, and you know, my advice would be back to your university, somebody independent like the National Career Service, and a professional, good quality recruitment agency in the type of industry and marketplace that you want to be on, and take those things on board. So I do think that help is out there if people can look for it.
Yeah, I think there's a wealth of opportunity for graduates to go to, lots of places to go to. It's just signposting them to that. Raj, concerns about cost pressures and rises over the coming months, that's something for you, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we're very wary of, given the fact the furlough scheme comes to an end at the end of this month, sees grants for self-employed individuals, but also the VAT reductions has been a godsend for a number of those operating in the hospitality sector and driving consumer demand. And it's the one thing that we would say about the autumn plan. It's that one thing that it was missing was that provision that if there was a future lockdown, if national restrictions were imposed, we would need to see specific financial support for businesses that are likely to be affected by that. And that's one thing that we're working with the British Chambers ahead of the upcoming autumn statement to lobby for.
Yeah, I mean, at the very beginning of this morning's session, you know, we talked about price rises, we talked about issues around talent and retaining talent, and and also around some of the supply chain issues. You know, as a company, I'm affected by those, and many people are. So there's all that going on in the background, but it was great to see from the report this morning that there is the other side of it, where there's a degree of positivity coming through now, and now's the time furthermore to be, you know, creative in every aspect of what we're doing. So it's about that creativity, diversity, and energy. We all need the energy to not only see us through the short term, but the medium and the long term, and really review what we're about and how we want to do business. So thanks ever such a lot to all of you who've given your time this morning. Thank you to the audience who've stuck with us very early on. The speakers, Joe Birch from BCU, Raj from the Chamber, our brilliant Raj, Aidi Owankwe from BCC, Claire Hatton from WMCA, and Matt Burling, SF Executive. Thank you, BCU, for your ongoing fabulous support, and thank you again, audience, and hopefully see you soon.